So, you've got £200 to spend on a compact digital camera. Which one should you buy? Matt Goloczynski has the answers.
You can pick up any of these cameras for around the £200 mark, and the key thing is that they're all slightly different. So if it's manual control you want, or if it's just a waterproof camera for your holidays, there's probably something out there that's suited to your need. Okay, so the first model we're going to look at is the Canon XS75. It was released at the same time as the XS70 model, and a lot of the specification is actually quite similar. One main difference is that it's actually got a 3-inch LCD screen and it doesn't have a viewfinder. The camera features a 7-megapixel sensor and a 3x optical zoom, which is fairly standard. The ISO range is pretty good though. It stretches from 80 to 1600, and it also features red eye correction and face detection. Canon's latest version of their processing engine, the Digic 3, has been included in this model, and you can really tell its performance because the starting time and focusing time are both very fast. Images from the XS75 are generally quite good. The exposures are accurate and the shadow detail is well maintained. One big problem is with purple fringing, which does tend to creep into far too many shots. So keeping that in mind, we give it 85%. Okay, so the next camera I'm going to look at is this one, the Olympus FE250. It's currently at the top of the FE range, and it features a bright capture technology, which is previously seen in the Mu range, but it's now been incorporated into this one. The camera has an 8-megapixel sensor and a 3x optical zoom, and that's pretty standard, but the predecessor to this, the FE240, did have a 5x optical zoom and only a marginally bigger body, so if it was included here, that would have been a worthy compromise. In addition to the 15 scene modes, the camera also has a guide mode, which shows 11 common techniques and takes you straight onto the mode which to shoot them on. It's pretty good, and it means that reading the manual really isn't necessary for most of the time. The camera's ISO stretches up to 10,000, which is pretty impressive on a compact of this sort of specification. After 6400 though, you can only use it on a reduced setting, 3 megapixels, so you can only really print sort of 6x4, 5x7 size prints. It's just as well because it is pretty noisy after 6400, so you should only really use it in emergencies. Images from the FE250 are actually quite impressive. On a low ISO, about 64 to 200, there's very little noise, the colour's very good and the exposures are accurate. After that, things do start to break up a little bit, but that's fairly typical of compacts of this specification. And overall, we give it 87%. Okay, so now we're going to look at the Samsung i70, which isn't so much a camera, more of a multimedia extravaganza. It features an MP3 player, an MPEG-4 video recorder, text viewer, multimedia player. So it's quite surprising that it also features a specification which is quite similar to a lot of the other models here. It has to be said that handling has been compromised by the design of the camera. It's got a nice large LCD screen and a menu pad, but the menu pad itself is quite embedded and it's quite difficult to press the buttons. And not only that, but when you select a feature, it doesn't actually explain what it does, it just gives you a little icon, which to many people might be a bit confusing. One of the better features of the camera is the wide-shot mode, which takes 2 exposures, one with flash and one without, and it leaves you to select the most correctly exposed afterwards. With enough light, the camera can actually perform quite well, and exposures are good, fringing is controlled, and you can still see quite a bit of shadow detail. Unfortunately, from about ISO 80 to 200, the colours are slightly too saturated and don't provide very real skin tones, with ISO 200 probably providing the most realistic. As is the case with a lot of these all-in-one combos, the camera doesn't particularly excel in any area, so we give it 81%. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Canon PowerShot A570 IS. The camera features a 7-megapixel sensor and a 4x optical zoom, which stretches from 35 to 140, equivalent on a 35mm camera, which is pretty good. And not only that, but it's also stabilised in the lens. As is the case in the previous model, the A560, the camera features an ISO range of 80 to 1600, which is pretty good. It also features the same Digic 3 processor as on the XS75, which does help a lot with focusing and startup times. One of the key improvements over the A560 model is the better spacing of the menu buttons at the back. One thing I'm not too taken with is the switch between reviewing images and taking images, which is a little bit stiff and it'll probably operate better as a set of buttons. The camera really shines in its images. They're sharp, they contain masses of detail, and you can see a really good dynamic range displaying shadow and highlight detail. Noise is quite well controlled to about 400, and we give this camera overall 88%. Okay, so now we're going to look at the Pentax Opto W30 model, which succeeds the W20. One of the main upgrades is that its waterproof functionality has been increased. You can now go 3 meters for up to 2 hours of this underwater. In addition to that, it's also dustproof. The camera still features a 7 megapixel sensor, but the ISO range has been stretched to 3200 now. Not only that, but it's coupled with digital shake reduction mode, which means that the ISO is boosted to compensate for the effects of camera shake. From looking at and using the camera, you can tell it's only really been designed for one key purpose in mind, and that's to be waterproof. Pressing the shutter and the menu buttons is slightly resistant, and you might find that a little bit uncomfortable if you're using it outside of the water. In terms of image quality, the camera doesn't actually put too bad a performance in. The exposures are quite good, colours quite good at low ISOs, and noise is quite well controlled. Unfortunately, purple fringing does creep into areas even when they're not too contrasty, and for that reason we give it 80%. Okay, the last camera we're going to look at is the Panasonic Lumix FX30 model. A lot of it's based around the FX01 model that it replaces. The only key differences being that it's slightly slimmer and that the mode dials had a couple of extra functions added to it. Apart from that, it's still got a 28mm wide-angle lens, which gives it a 3.6 times optical zoom, and the Mega OIS image stabilisation. One feature that the camera has is the intelligent ISO feature, which basically boosts the ISO to compensate for the effects of camera shake. One of the good things about that is that it can be used independent from the Mega OIS. So basically it means that you've got the choice of how you stabilise your image. Another key addition is the new processing engine, the Venus 3. What this does is help the camera with startup and focusing times, which are both pretty fast, and it also helps to eliminate noise from images. Thanks to its wide-angle lens, optical image stabilisation and a range of features, we scored the FX30 90%, which overall makes it the winner of this group test.